I want to do a video about the highlights to my trip to Airventure 2023. Now, in case you don't know what Airventure is, it is a fly-in put on by the EAA, Experimental Aircraft Association. Happens in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, about the last week of July every year. Calling it a fly-in is underselling it. It's a huge convention. And by the way, if you're not familiar with the EAA, experiment in that name refers to the Federal Aviation Administration's regulations for registering airplanes. If you build your own airplane, it has to be in the experimental category. So that's how the association got its name. Because this fly-in is basically, or at least started, with a convention for home-built airplanes, flying together and celebrating home building. Now, last time I was there was 2018, so finally I had a chance to go up again this year. I took a little travel trailer that my wife and I bought, and I stayed at Camp Scholler there near the airport. And by the way, I recently made a video that was a tour of Camp Scholler, and I'll put a link to that up in the upper right-hand corner. I mentioned that Airventure is a large convention. Here's just an idea to give you an idea how big it can be. You can tailor your experience to whatever you're comfortable with. But on Thursday, it was the fourth full day that I had been there at Airventure. I walked 18,300 steps, and I didn't walk as much as I typically do. I just went specifically to the things I want to take photos of, because that's basically what I did on Thursday. That last day is I took photos, and most of those photos are here in this video. So you could easily walk way more than 18,300 in a day, or you could walk less. In this video, I wanted to give you an idea of what my visit to Oshkosh was like, just because I took pictures of things and clips of things that I was interested in. But you can actually tailor your visit to what you are interested in. Oshkosh has so many different activities, so many different sights to see, that it could be pleasing to just about every kind of person, even those who are not pilots. So as some examples, let's say you just want to see an air show. So you can have about 3 hours of air show every day. You can actually go up to the airplanes when the air show is not happening, and frequently you can talk to the pilots that flew the airplanes in the air show. Let's say you're interested in vintage airplanes and maybe restoring vintage airplanes. There's a whole huge section of vintage airplanes there that you can look around, walk up to. Frequently the pilots will be there, you can talk to them. There's a Vintage Aircraft Association that you could join if you want to. They have forums for restoring airplanes, maintaining the airplanes, flying the airplanes. Let's say you're interested in home building. Of course, that's really what EAA is centered on. There's plenty of that. There's lots and lots of forums, lots of classes, and quite likely examples of the airplane you might be interested in building that you can look at, walk up to, maybe even talk to the person who built it. And there's a whole lot more. There's too much to really get into in this video. It would take too long. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the things that I'm interested in, things I took pictures of. And we're going to start with the main area there at Airventure. So let me show you some of the stuff that I looked at, or things I thought someone else might be interested in. As I was walking by, I thought, I'll take a picture of that. Someone might be interested in it. And to give you an overview of what else I'm going to do, I'm going to go through the home built section. I'm only going to take a few photos there to show you some things I saw that were interesting. I don't spend a whole lot of time in the home built section. Then I really pretty much ignore the air shows that are going on. Of course, you can hear them, you can look up and see them. I'm not that interested in the air shows, so I have almost nothing there, but I'll show a few pictures. What I am most interested in when I go to Oshkosh are the forums and the workshops. Now, I didn't take as many pictures there as I could have, but I'll give you a little taste of what that is. There are some things that occur off airport. I'll give a little idea what those are. And then we'll go down to the ultralight area called the Fun Fly Zone. We'll take a look at some of the ultralights that were on display, the non-vendor ultralights. And then I'll show a few of the ultralights that the vendors brought. And then we'll look at the Twilight Flight Fest. And then I'll show you a couple of interesting design ideas I happen to see. So let's take a look at a few photos that I took of the main display area at Airventure. This is a shot down the main access way. If you come in the main gate and you look straight east, you'll see usually a really large airplane ahead of you. This is the square area. This is where all really large airplanes are parked at Airventure. And it changes. There could be a different plane here just about every day. Now this example here, this is the Dream Lifter. So it's a special purpose cargo plane for hauling really big things like airplane fuselages, satellites, really big stuff. And here's an F-35. Also, this is on the square. Osprey V-22. This is the Guppy. It's the same idea as the Dream Lifter. It's just a little bit smaller, uses turboprop engines. Here is a C-17. Also, there was a C-5 there during the week. Of course, a Corsair from World War II. That's on the square. You'll see a few Vietnam Air or World War II era airplanes there, but not too many. And part of the reason for not having very many of the warbirds here at the square is that there's a dedicated place for warbirds at the north end of the field, and there are a lot of warbirds down there. I didn't make it down there this year, so I don't have any pictures from that area. Okay, I want to take this picture because this is one of the large hangars they have for vendors. If you go to like a conventional convention, particularly inside one, you've got lots of these 10 by 10 or 10 by 20 or 20 by 20 areas that vendors have bought to display their wares. And so at Airventure, that occurs here in these hangars. There's 4 of these, A, B, C, and D. They're in a big square. And here's a side view, so you can kind of get an idea of how big these are. They're pretty good sized hangars with lots and lots of vendors in there. Now, Airventure is pretty big, and to help people get around, particularly people who have disabilities, they have these trams that run around. Now, in the main area, they use the yellow tram. To go down to the ultralight area, there's a blue tram. You can see this little yellow flag here on the tractor. And to go to warbirds, if I remember correctly, it's a red tram. Now here's a section of the main area for learning about aviation and more. There's been a proliferation of universities that have flight programs, flight training programs, showing up here at Airventure with their tents. And that's what you're seeing over here on the right-hand side. You can see one of the tents there, but there's a whole lot of universities now that are showing up, whereas in the past there only used to be a few. And I'm sure there are universities in the big hangars too. I didn't go through there this year, but I imagine there's quite a few universities in there too. We got Women's Venture here. This is part of an EAA initiative to get more women into aviation. NASA has a big tent here in this area, and so they'll have a lot of NASA employees there talking about the various projects, research projects that NASA has going on. AOPA has a tent in roughly the same area. In fact, AOPA had 2 tents this year, side by side. NBAA has a little tent there. Actually, it's a pretty good sized tent. I want to do this one because my wife is a member in NBAA. I wanted to send this picture to her to show that they had their tent going. National Air Traffic Controllers Association. They actually have a nice series of seminars that they put on about how to communicate with ATC. I want to take this one. This isn't really a good picture, but it's kind of representative of the eating places that you'll find here at EAA Airventure. There's lots and lots and lots of eating places, and you can get some varieties. It's not all hamburgers and hot dogs. Of course, Garmin, since they sell a lot to general aviation, they have their big tent here, and they frequently have airplanes parked out front of YouTubers who have put Garmin avionics in their airplane. Boeing has their tent in that area. Oh, this was interesting. I hadn't noticed it before. It's probably happened in previous years, I just did not notice it. Delta, American Airlines, and Southwest all had fairly good sized representation here. Big tents, and if I remember correctly, Delta and Southwest had airplanes down in the big square area. And you'll see some interesting mock-ups here of people who are developing an airplane. They don't have a flyable version yet, but they've made a mock-up that you can sit and look at, and they'll frequently be asking for deposits if you're interested in buying the airplane. In this case, this one was somewhat interesting because it has 3 flying surfaces, has a canard, a main wing, and a tail. This was kind of interesting, and it reminded me of something that I saw back in, I think it was 2018. You may know of an airplane that flew, I think it was last summer, that had a laminar flow body, and so it looked kind of tadpole shaped. and it's supposed to have really low drag. I actually saw an exhibit of that here at Airventure in 2018, and it was kind of in the shape of this one where they had no paint on it, they had some of the structure, and they were exhibiting it. So something similar here. So you'll occasionally run across some airplanes that someone's developing. It's not just a mock-up, they actually have part of the prototype here that you can look at. Well, now let's take a look at a few home builds. I usually make at least one quick run through the home builds every visit. You never know when something new and interesting might show up. EAA has a collection of home builds that they put out, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So here's a row of Rutan EZs all lined up. Frequently when aircraft fly in, the guys that are directing parking there will try to put the same type of airplanes together, whether it be home builds or spam cans. There's a couple more EZs that I did not get in the picture just to the right here. And here is a Breezy. I always find this airplane interesting because the pilot sits so far out in front of the wing. And it's really pretty fun to watch these fly too. I think this is a very interesting design, and some of the others that came out of this. And this is again a Rutan design. It's basically, well, it's tandem wing. It's canard idea, but the wingspan's almost the same on both of them. Has a little 18 horsepower Briggs & Stratton in it. Pretty cool airplane. This is another Rutan design, a very fascinating airplane, the Grizzly. Let's take a look at its side view of it here. So this is a canard design, but it has Fowler flaps. But the ailerons look like they're a slotted flap, and there are little fences in between the flaps, and the ailerons are at the ends of the flaps. So very interesting design. And when Airventure is not in session, EAA has more airplanes than they can store over at the museum. A lot of the airplanes are over at the museum. There's lots of hangars here that during Airventure are used for other things, like the Homebuilders Workshop, etc. But these are stored in those hangars when Airventure is not happening. Now there are far more experimentals that were flown into the show. There are hundreds of them. I just didn't take pictures of them. On my last day there, I decided to capture a little bit air show stuff. I normally ignore the air shows, except maybe taking a glance at them here and there. I want to capture just a little bit for you guys. Not a lot, but just a little bit. So we start with the missing man formation. And this was played to taps, so you can see them coming in. And then you see the missing man leaving the formation. And I decided to grab some F-22 photos, so I got a little bit of that. We'll look at a few of those. And they loved to run their afterburner and make lots and lots of noise. And then I captured something that I really enjoy watching, which is called the Legacy Flight. Legacy Flight is a mixture of old warbirds and modern warbirds, and they'll fly them together in formation. In this case, it is a P-51, that's the one that's lower here, an A-1 in the middle, and then an F-22. Let's just watch these guys fly for just a little bit. The thing that I most enjoy doing at Airventure is going to the forums and the workshops. Now the forums are structures, pretty much open air structures, where pilots, builders, designers, vendors come and give talks. And then the workshops are where builders can get some hands-on experience doing some composites, doing some wood, doing some metalworking, doing some welding, and doing some fabric covering. So this year I went to quite a few talks. One of them was Barnaby Wainfan, and that's one of his talks. He gave two different talks. By the way, Barnaby Wainfan is a fairly well-known airplane designer. He designed the Facet Mobile. You may be familiar with that airplane. Now I put a section here in the video for things that are off airport. And by off airport, I mean they could be adjacent to the airport on some of the EAA grounds, or they could be truly off airport. Now I've only took a picture of one thing off airport, and that is the fly-in theater. So every night, in fact the night before EAA starts also, they'll have a movie here at this giant inflatable movie screen, and they have free popcorn. So I went for 2 nights. I went Sunday night before EAA started, and that first night was Top Gun Maverick, and then I went another night, let's see, that was Wednesday night of the air show, and they had Amelia. Now there's other things that are off airport. Lots of things. I'll try to mention just a couple here. One of them is the seaplane base. You can get a bus to go to the seaplane base, and that is pretty cool. You have to go there at least once. Another thing is the EAA Museum. I mentioned that a little bit before. So it's on EAA grounds close to the airport. So you can get a bus there or you can walk it. It's not that far. Another thing that's off airport but on EAA grounds, it's not really an activity, but it's Camp Scholler. So if you're driving to Oshkosh and you want to camp there, you can camp at Camp Scholler. Now I did a video on that, which is a tour of the camp. And if you'd like to see that, there'll be a link up in the upper right hand corner. And now we go back down to the south end of the field to the Ultralight area. Airventure is now calling that the Fun Fly Zone. And that's because it's not just ultralights anymore. It includes LSAs, ELSAs, and it includes rotorcraft. There's twice a day, though, that ultralights and LSAs get to fly around in the ultralight pattern. In the evening, it starts about 6:30 and lasts until about 8 o'clock. I took a few photos down there. I took more photos down there than just about anywhere else. Let's take a quick look at some of those photos.
Get the sun
and then right after the ultralights and LSAs fly around, the paragliders get to fly around for a little while. It's about a half-hour flight. And I took some video of them, so let's look at a little bit of that. Now let's take a look at some of the ultralights that were brought in for display. Now these are not vendor ultralights. These are ultralights that individuals brought in. I'm not going to look up the names of all of them. I don't know all of them. This is a Quicksilver MX. This one did a lot of flying when flying was allowed for ultralights. So this one's out there a lot. It was great to watch it. Of course, we've got a weed hopper here. There were some anniversaries here. There was a weed hopper anniversary and a few other anniversaries. They had little signs out there how many years it had been since they had first been developed. And I'm only showing the actual true ultralights here. There were some other LSA planes that were here and some trikes. And there was a hang glider here. It was pretty cool. It's good to see that. It's been a long time since I saw a hang glider. You don't see very many Canard-style ultralights. Legal Eagle, if I remember correctly. There was a couple of this. By the way, I'm only showing one example of each. There were a couple of Legal Eagles, a couple of MXs. This Kolb did quite a bit of flying. And of course, there were vendors in the ultralight area that brought their ultralights to sell. Let's take a look at a few of those. And again, I'm only going to look at true ultralights. Well, for the most part. Now this one was kind of unusual. I'm pretty sure it's not an ultralight, but it's got a propeller buried back in the fuselage. And of course, we got an ultra cruiser there. One of the things that happens down at the Fun Fly Zone is the Twilight Flight Fest. So it starts roughly at sundown. And this year, at one point, they had some skydivers come in. And the Twilight Flight Fest usually starts with a STOL demonstration. And let's watch a little short takeoffs and short landings.
To be outdone once again, it's our favorite, the national treasure, Hal Stockman. Hal Stockman about to unleash a swarm of angry bees. These are wow! This is Jason Boussat in full send. Just hanging it off there, Corey. Here he comes. Whoa! Fantastic airmanship there. Absolutely beautiful approach. That wing really hanging on. Wow. You can hear him just giving those bursts of throttle over and over again to keep it exactly on the line. Here we go from the right. The lights of this airplane putting on a dramatic display. This is Steve Henry in Yeehaw 8. He wants to see that line go by. He likes to see the line so that he can dump those flaps, get everything out. Let's watch him drag it in and nail the line. This is Yeehaw 8. Woo! The Rand S20. Nice, he dropped it in from about 7 or 8 feet there. Good performance there. But this man flying in the Rand S7 Courier. This is Hal Stockman. I can't land at 172 in these distances either, you know.
And now we get to one of the parts that I really enjoy about Oshkosh. It's not an official part, it's what I do on my own, and that's to look at airplanes that have new or interesting design ideas. So it could be either for structure or it could be for aerodynamics. Now, to introduce you to something I saw that was really cool, let me show you something that's fairly typical. Not really typical on general aviation light aircraft, but on this airplane here. This airplane has a dual slot flap system, so it's going to have a whole lot of lift on landing. Let's look a little closer. So you can see it's fairly complicated mechanism. Let me zoom in a little bit. So here's a better look at the linkage system for doing this double slotted flap. The idea of this linkage system is to keep it in the optimal shape for every deflection angle, and you can see it's hinged fairly far below the bottom of the wing. And the airlines do this almost exactly the same way. And then from the back side, you can see it looks about right. It's got a slot right there at the top of the wing and then another slot a little bit farther back. And it's going to keep those slots at roughly the same width at each retraction angle until you get really close to being fully retracted. And then, of course, those slots should close back up and keep the wing fairly efficient. So that was a typical two-slot arrangement for flaps. Let's look at something a little bit different. Now, as you can see from this side shot of this airplane, it is a pretty simple design. In fact, the rudder is pretty straight, the wings are straight, elevator is straight. They're trying to make this design, it looks like, about as simple as they can. Well, now we got a close-up shot of the flaps here. So you can see it's got a fairly simple hinge arrangement. There's only one spot hinge just a little bit below the flaps. Now this is looking at the flap from the front, looking backward. And you can see a slot here. And you can almost see another little opening, a second slot there. Let's get another view of this. Now here it's more evident. I've come in a little bit closer and now we're looking more up. And now you can see there are two slots here. So you got the flap, you got the middle airfoil, and then you got the wing. And you can see here from this little fitting, the aft slot is fixed in position. There's no linkage to change the size of that slot. Now here's a look from aft, looking forward. Got the top of the wing. And you can just see the aft edge of that middle airfoil in there in the slot. So there's a slot above and a slot below. But you'll notice the flap is fully retracted here. So there's a slot that's open there all the time. So this is an interesting double slot scenario. Let's move back a little bit. The aft slot is fixed in position. It's always the same. There's always air flowing up through there, even when the flap is fully retracted. The forward slot closes up quite a bit when you're fully retracted, but as you lower the flaps, that slot gets a little bit bigger and works more like the forward slot of a double slotted flap. It's not going to give you the lift of the other airplane we just saw with a double slot and a much more complicated linkage, but it's going to be better than a single slot. At least it should be better. So I found this to be a very interesting double slot arrangement I hadn't thought of doing. But you're going to lose some efficiency of the wing in flight because that aft slot is always going to have air going up through it. And there's another thing that I saw on an ultralight as I was walking around the ultralight area. This is in a very, very lightweight seat. It's got a simple, something like a sunscreen for the seat fabric. And then it's got rivets along the front edge there underneath your thighs. It's got more rivets here back where your tailbone would be. And then at the top, it's got a really simple arrangement with some eyelets and some cord holding the top of that seat up. I thought that was an interesting idea. I probably wouldn't do mine this way, but I could do a variation on it. This is going to be a very lightweight seat. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this view of Airventure 2023 at Oshkosh, Wisconsin. At least the way I go through and look at things at Oshkosh. Until next time.